DAVIDsTEA was this amazing success. I had a concept before DAVIDsTEA that none of you have heard of called Fitting Room Central. That was a total failure. And Mad Radish is in between. It's in business purgatory. And so I talk about sort of how companies end up. So you either can start off in business purgatory or end up in business purgatory later on. And I talk about how companies end up there or start there. And really it comes down to three things, I find. It's either product, it's people, or it's ego. And I walk them through different stories about how to recognize which one of the three it is. And then I ask the audience to do some introspection to be like, what do you think it is for you? Because oftentimes we know these things deep down inside, but we're just slow to act on them. So some of the stories I tell in this talk relate to Mad Radish on the product. So for example, we started off thinking that people wanted healthy food, and the perception people have around healthy food is that it's like taking your medicine. Unfortunately, we've had grandma's boiled vegetables and other companies that have kind of not inspired people with the level of quality and flavor that you need. So we very quickly realized that people want food that makes them feel good. Health is really a spectrum. Different people are different places along the spectrum, and the food has to taste amazing first and foremost, and it has to be familiar. And so we shifted from things like watermelon salad to things like fired up chicken or fajita barbacoa, which is like Ontario beef, and still has greens, still has lots of vegetables, but more familiar flavors like lime, cilantro, jalapenos, things like that. And that has been more successful for us, and we'll keep going in that direction. We learned that you don't want a chef from the fine dining world. We were wrong on some of the people. Fine dining is very different. You make a dish, you bring it out, the person creates it and delivers it right off of cooking it. Here we're making food in the morning, and then we got to churn it out fast because we do probably most of our business in about an hour and a half time frame. So we ended up with a product developer, for example, and we use chefs on consulting to add the creative, but you ultimately need to be able to operationalize a dish. You want consistency. It's got to taste the same and make you feel the same every time. That's why some of the more popular fast food concepts have been so successful. I'll never forget going to, when I was 19, France with some friends. We went to Europe, the typical thing you do after university, you go travel Europe, and here we are in this amazing French cuisine and this food, and my buddy turns to me and is like, I want to go to McDonald's. And I'm like, what? And he goes, you know what you're going to get. And that was the answer, and it always stuck with me, and that really is the game. So we're looking to elevate food, but make sure it's consistent. So those are some of the lessons there. I also apply some of the ego lessons at DAVIDsTEA. I remember we went down to New York. We were crushing it in Canada. It was going amazing. We opened up in New York City. So in Canada, I imagine almost all of you, if not all of you, have been into DAVIDsTEA before. So if you haven't, you go in, they take down these tins, you smell all these different teas, and it's like, vanilla, and at the time this was 2008, 2009, 2010, this was earth-shattering. Nobody had ever done tea in this way. You walk in the store, it's like, oh my God. They'd come back with their friends, they're like, do the thing you just did for me, and they're smelling these teas. You open up in Halifax or Fort McMurray or wherever, or even in Toronto, it's like, Sue, and then there's Mary, and all of a sudden they're smelling teas together, and they're chatting, and 20 minutes later, they're still looking at stuff. You go down to New York City, and Sue and Mary don't want to talk to each other, and 20 minutes is not going to happen. And so what happened, what we realized really, really quickly was that they were treating us like the Starbucks of tea. So whereas in Canada, the cups of tea to go was only about 10 to 15% of the business, in the States, right out of the gate, it was like 65. So what we didn't do, and we should have done, and they still haven't done, is we should have very quickly realized that this is a food and beverage concept, not a retail concept. In Canada, it was a retail concept. In the States, it's food and beverage. And so we never operationalized for the cups of tea to be able to do the speed and the turn that you need to, the way Starbucks has, for example. We never added a food program the way you would want to with the food and beverage. And so we never really quite took off in the US. And I think instead what we did, which looking back on it was arrogance, ego, whatever you want to call it, was we said, no, we're going to teach them how to drink loose leaf tea. because we had done that quite successfully in Canada, you know, so anyway, I talk through these various stories in order to illustrate some of the reasons people end up in this business purgatory and some of the ways you can get out of it. I talk about different, not just my own experiences, but experiences in different fields. You know, Netflix once approached Blockbuster to sell Netflix for like $50 million to Blockbuster, and they're like, kind of laughed him out of the room. And you all know how that story ended. You know, and then I talk about the need for that curiosity and challenging the status quo when it comes to the people that you get. Rockefeller had a massive kerosene lamp business, the Standard Oil Company, and you know, then Edison comes along and invents electricity, and he's done. He's screwed, right? I mean, like no more kerosene lamps. His whole business is done, and they realized that gasoline was a byproduct of kerosene production, and managed to shift the entire thing over to gasoline. Because they found use for what they were dumping in the river. It was a waste product. Yeah, it's amazing. And then, you know, the rest is history, right? So anyway, I walk through these different stories, and I conclude that, you know, you got to kind of hone in on, is it the product, the people, or the ego? And usually it's a combination of that. But anyway, so that's the talk. I really try to get through to people who are kind of stagnant and have not experienced big success or big failure and are just kind of treading water.